We have three panels today. First, we start with the Communications Workers Union, and then we're going to be listening to evidence from Royal Mail and then from Post Office. So good morning to both of you. Dave Ward, who's the General Secretary of the CWU, and Andy Furey, who's the Assistant Secretary of the CWU. Thank you for coming in this morning. Mr. Ward, just to start, could you give us an update on the current status of your negotiations with Royal Mail, please?
So we've entered a period of talks. They're meant to be intensive negotiations from the 9th of January through to the 20th of January. We want to try and come out of that with, as a minimum, a clear way forward, but hopefully to try and resolve the dispute, all of the issues that are involved. I have to say that we're still not confident that we're in a place where we can reach that agreement. So the union will be reballoting its members because we're at the 6-month stage coming up very soon. And we're confident our members will continue to support us to try and get the right agreement, not just for our members, but also for the services we provide and for customers, businesses, and for the future of the company. What we want to do is align the interests of workers, customers and the company in an agreement that modernises in the right way. I have to say, very similar to what we already had, which was the Pathway to Change agreement, which the company reneged on.
Okay, and Andy Furey, from the Post Office perspective?
Yes, Post Office, we are still in dispute over pay freeze for 2020-21, and a 5% offer has been made for 22-23. Both of those have been rejected by our membership. We have now conducted 2 ballots for strike action, and on both occasions there have been over 90% yes votes. Currently got action short of strike action taking place, and unfortunately there's no talks planned. I wrote to the Chief Executive, Nick Reed, last week seeking a meeting with him. Thus far he's refused to engage in negotiations directly, which is regrettable. And we've offered to call off the action should that meeting get off the ground, and we're looking to reach a settlement for the last 2 years which are in dispute, and potentially this coming year. So we're trying to look at all different bases to try and find a way through this, but our members are determined to find a resolution and are willing to take further action. And unfortunately Post Office are not giving them the due regard that they as key workers that worked through the pandemic, and clearly it's not an issue of affordability, particularly as Nick Reed himself doubled his income and earnings last year to £850,000 from the previous year. So it's not an issue of affordability here.
Thank you very much. Ian Lavery, please.
Thanks, Chair. Mr. Ward, morning. The CWU have been in negotiations, discussions, consultations, whatever you might call it, with the Royal Mail for months and months and months now with regards to the current dispute. Can you give the committee just a bit of a flavour of what's happening here, because people are very much unaware of what is happening behind the scenes? What is it going to take? What will it take to resolve this industrial dispute?
I think it's important that the committee recognise that the scale of what we say is the most brutal attack on any group of workers that the UK has seen for decades, that you recognise that it really is a fight for the future of every postal worker's job, for the future of their terms, their conditions, their pay, and for the future of the services that Royal Mail provide to the public, most notably the universal service. Where our concerns are is that the company's whole strategy is not about, in our view, modernising. It's a phrase that's often used to put workers and unions on the back foot as though we're not up for change. We had a change agreement called the Pathway to Change. It would have brought in a 24/7 network. We accepted that it would bring in changes to try and capture parcel growth going forward. But crucially, it also had a strategy to try and minimise letter decline, because there was a recognition then that despite the fact that letters are declining, there are so many businesses and so many members of the public that rely on those services. And also, importantly, It was an agreement that we said that we would expand the role of postal workers to bring in new products, new services that would actually help grow businesses in the UK, would actually help grow the UK economy, more tailored services to local level. And postal workers were meant to be part of that agreement. What we've got now is nothing more than an asset stripping agenda. It's the next stage of breaking up the company. It's a levelling down agenda in everything, in the value of the jobs that postal workers do. It's about replacing the existing workforce over time with a new model, which we've seen across the UK, which is based on self-employed workers, where they have to basically take the burden of paying for their own vans. They don't get holiday pay, they don't get sick pay, they don't get pensions. It's all of that stuff that we've seen in this country for too long. And it's about prioritising the shareholders in this debate over key workers. So during the pandemic, our members, they were categorised as key workers. They kept the country connected. They kept Royal Mail going. They got Royal Mail to a position during that period where they made £758 million profits. That was posted, those profits, in May 2022. Our concerns are that the company have made two catastrophic decisions. If they're going to say that they're now fighting for survival financially, which we expect them to say today, then they need to face up to and be held to account for the terrible decisions that they've made under what we've called gross mismanagement. Those two key decisions that they made back in May was one, to give shareholders £567 million of that profit through shareholder dividends and buyback schemes, and two, to end the cross-subsidy of GLS. Now, GLS is the international company that Royal Mail owns, and if they're in that serious trouble, when they made those decisions, they knew there was a cost of living crisis. They knew there was a downturn expected across the UK economy, but they still chose to make those decisions, which we say amount to gross mismanagement. What the workers are facing now, compared to the agreement that we had previously, is an attack on the number of jobs, the likes of which we've never seen. And, the company have said to shareholders, to the markets, that there's 10,000 jobs. We believe there are thousands upon thousands more jobs at risk here than the 10,000 that the company are putting forward. The company, as I said, wants to replace the existing workforce. They're waging war on the current workforce. The levels of intimidation, the levels of psychological sort of bullying, to try and make the job not worth them staying. They want to force people out of this business to replace them with a different workforce, including agency workers and including new entrants on 20% less overall pay terms and conditions. That's why we say this is a levelling down agenda. They want to shrink the infrastructure. So another of our major concerns is that we believe the company are deliberately running down the universal service. So their proposals that will affect postal workers' work-life balance are to change attendance patterns by up to 3 hours. In some of our big mail centres, they're talking about early shifts that were previously 6 o'clock in the morning, not starting till 11 o'clock in the afternoon. What we say is that is a fatal flaw in their strategy for growth in the future, that it will mean that they're abandoning the AM delivery period, and we expect the competitors to move into that period once Royal Mail move out of that period. The strategy in deliberately running down the USO is because they see it as a burden, not as an advantage. And, what we say is any company that's in the logistics sector, the postal sector, that's got a reach of 32 million addresses every single day of the week, then if you can't use that competitive edge, then you shouldn't be running a business like Royal Mail. And, our concern here is this is the end. If we don't modify or significantly change the plans that Royal Mail are putting forward, then we believe this is the end of Royal Mail as one of the iconic British UK companies.
Thank you. I've got a quick supplementary from Mark Pawsey.
Mr Ward, yeah, I heard you just say that the company are trying to get rid of the workers. But, I mean, we've taken evidence from business after business, which is thought of people, and we've heard evidence from some public sector employees, NHS for example, where we're hearing that employers are going to work for Amazon and other such people because the wages there are higher. Where, if that is the company strategy, where are they going to find these workers that you think are going to replace your members?
Well, I think that's an excellent question. What is their strategy is in the agreement that they're putting in front of us, which they call their best and final offer, although they've moved away from that on a number of significant areas in the last week or two. What they want is unlimited numbers of owner-drivers, self-employed workers to come in. Where they're going to get them...
They don't exist. They're not in the work. We know that.
Well, that's exactly the point that we're making. It's time to put trust...
They want to shrink the business, essentially.
They want to shrink the infrastructure of the business. They want to shrink the workforce. And they're saying that's because they're in financial trouble. And what we say is postal workers, decent, hard-working postal workers across the UK, who play a pivotal role in the UK economy, in their relationship with communities. Trust on the doorstep, which we own, is being given up because they've got a strategy.
But you accept, though, that there aren't this pool of workers available to replace your members if they do what you're suggesting, which is try and get rid of your members?
Well, I accept that, given the state of the UK economy at the moment and what you've said. I don't believe the company accept that.
Thank you. Andy McDonald, please.
Thanks, Chair. Mr Ward, you've talked a lot about the pathway to change, a comprehensive national agreement, and you've attacked Royal Mail around gross mismanagement and the attack on jobs. Do you see this as an intentional dislocation by management from the pathway to change agreement? And is that, in your view, deliberately so to mark a breakup of the organisation, a potential takeover? What's behind this?
Well, we really are struggling to understand the rationale that the company have put forward. So we can only conclude that after we reached an agreement, which was another groundbreaking agreement that would have seen the interest of workers, customers and the company totally aligned in a real modernisation agenda, would have meant a lot of change, could have still meant some people leaving the business on decent voluntary redundancy terms. The company abandoned all of that process, that agreement. They have reneged on all aspects of that agreement. They wrote to the union in September 2022, ripping up pretty much every single agreement that the union has, which protects our members' terms and jobs and their conditions that we fought for over many, many years. What the strategy seems to be now is purely to deal with the financial problems that they've created, a self-inflicted wound, and we're paying the price for it. Is there, sitting behind that, a potential takeover on Royal Mail in the future? We believe, yes, that is true. The government cleared the company Vesa, private equity investment group based in Luxembourg, to increase their shareholding. Our understanding is that Vesa continue to increase their shareholding in recent weeks. And we do think that sitting behind all of this is sort of boardroom politics, boardroom power struggles about who owns the Royal Mail. And, you know, our view is that the workers should have a greater say in the company that they take great pride in and have worked for many years. So there are so many major problems here that sit behind this dispute. And, you know, the frustration is whenever you deal with this dispute, all people want to talk to you about is pay. Now, pay is hugely important for our members. Worst cost of living crisis in living memory. We want a deal on pay as well. Of course we do. But the changes that Royal Mail are proposing, you know, we are very clear will shrink this company to a point where it will not exist as the Royal Mail that we know today.
And with it, is that universal service obligation then under threat? Because we've heard the attempts of the current owners of Royal Mail to degrade that further. And we've assured by the Secretary of State that that's not going to happen. But is that where this is headed?
It's definitely that the company do not see a universal service delivering to 32 million addresses every day. They do not see that as an advantage. They see it as a financial burden. And what we're saying is that any company in this sector would give their right arm to be able to have that infrastructure. And we say it is a fatal flaw in their plan to look to end the USO. They've gone to the government. They went to the government initially behind our backs, months before the official position. There's been a long-running saga on this where previous CEOs as well tried to go to the government to reduce the levels of service under the universal service obligation. Look, we understand the universal service can't be sustained unless we innovate it, unless we develop new products, new services. And there is a role here for Ofcom as well, because Ofcom at the moment, we agree with the employer on this point, that Ofcom are creating the circumstances where the universal service cannot continue economically. It's there for the future if we see it as part of building growth in the future. The Royal Mail should be able to track their parcels through that. Currently, Ofcom are denying them that opportunity. So definitely, our view is the company are deliberately running down the USO. There are stories coming out of every single delivery office in the country that they prioritise parcels over letters. They tell postal workers to keep the letters in the frame. They don't give our members the overtime if there's a problem with backlogs. This is what's been going on for months and months. Their Q2 results, performance-wise, I think it was last year, 2022, before the strikes had any impact, were down to 80% delivery of letters from 95%. That is a deliberate attempt to run down the universal service to get the government to agree to reduce service levels.
Thank you very much. Ruth Edwards, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Ward, you said that the Royal Mail was waging war against its workforce and that there was quite a lot of intimidation going on towards postal workers. That's a very serious accusation. Can you give us, the committee, a few examples of what you're referring to?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a situation where people, during the course of this dispute, in the lead up to this dispute, are being bombarded with communications that are clearly aimed at demoralising the workforce. There will be comments on the CEO's own, workplace social media platforms where, he'll say things that we say is goading the workforce. Things like, well, if you don't like the change, we'll go and find another job. There's a lack of engagement going on at local level. There's imposition of change on a daily basis. Our members, it's not just the days when we're on strike that our members are under pressure, because clearly, strikes are difficult in the current climate. When they go back to work, they're denied normal levels of overtime. They're told to do this, to do that. They're threatened if they don't complete the work in the time that they're supposed to finish the job by. They're threatened with delay in the mail. Many of them have been suspended. Over 200 reps of the union and members have been suspended. In our view, many of those charges fitted up to target and intimidate people. I think it needs to be the postal workers themselves. We're just the voice of the postal workers, and we've never seen this level of demoralisation, which we say is deliberately being done to force a lot of people out of the job.
Okay, thank you. And just to clarify, from my understanding, you seem to be saying there that there was some sort of unofficial repercussion for workers as a result of strikes. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's called the punishment charter, and it's always something that they've been doing through this dispute, where when people come back to work, they don't sort of allow them to carry on working normally. They force them into doing different things. They don't give them the earnings that they used to get previously. They've attacked workers on sick pay, where they start to, make out that there's no sick pay. They don't believe. If you put a sick note in now, the company disregard that and automatically say that, you shouldn't get sick pay until you can prove subsequently 2 weeks later. So the whole basis of how we work has been ripped up by the company.
Thank you. And you mentioned about postal workers being punished for delays. I've heard anecdotal evidence from postal workers that the walk routes have been sort of reorganised and that some of them are now so large that it is just impossible to deliver them within a shift, and that as a result mail is going back to the sorting office. Is that your experience too?
That's exactly what's happening. What the company are doing at the moment is imposing change by what we call managerial executive action. So with no input whatsoever from frontline postal workers, they're changing their routes, they're adding on to their existing routes. And as we say, this is an attempt to do two things. One, to get it in the minds of postal workers that change is inevitable, so there's no point in fighting against it, if you like. And two, to demoralise them, so that they just accept the change. What we're saying here is we have never seen a situation where the entire workforce have lost confidence in the leadership of the company. We've had disputes in the past, but it's never been as bitter as what this particular dispute is.
Thank you. And Mr Furey, at the Post Office, how are relations between the Post Office and postmasters?
Postmasters' morale is at an all-time low, unfortunately. We believe that the Post Office is sleepwalking into potentially massive thousands of closures. Postmasters are really struggling to make ends meet. The reward that they get for their endeavours and labours is paltry. Many of them are not even on the minimum hourly wage. Whilst they're self-employed, they are really, really struggling. And we're hearing reports every single day where people are saying they're just going to walk away from it. They can't make a living from providing postal services. So look, the root of this cause of all these problems is horizon, and that the inability of the Post Office to deal with that and to pay the compensation. So it's going to need a significant government intervention to ensure that there is a viable future for the Post Office. I think we're at the tipping point where if something is not done quickly, then we will see whole-scale closures. And the postmaster's lot is a very, very difficult one, and I don't think the Post Office are doing anywhere near as much as they should be doing to protect and safeguard those hard-working postmasters who, after all, are part of the infrastructure of the fabric of society.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Alan Brown, please.
Thanks, Chair. Just sticking yourself, Andy, turning to the Horizon scandal, the Criminal Cases Review Commission's noted that they've contacted 326 individuals, but they've only received 39 responses, and from the 39, only 22 former submasters have been back in touch with them, requesting information on how to challenge their convictions. That's only 7% of these potential wrong convictions looking at going to the next stage at this moment. So we know some of the former post office workers might not be aware of the services of the Review Commission. Others are traumatised. Some are getting on in age, obviously, from when the initial scandal happened. What other obstacles is there for former workers? And more importantly, how can the Criminal Cases Review Commission reach more former workers to get them to challenge their convictions? And is there too much pressure on individuals to take this forward rather than getting more assistance, as it were?
I think you accurately describe the ongoing situation there. Many of the postmasters that were victims, hundreds, if not thousands, of postmasters, some of them going back 20 odd years, some of them may be too elderly now to pursue justice on their behalves. Many of the postmasters are of an ageing population. Many of them won't have the financial and legal support to be able to pursue justice through the CRC. And I do believe that both the Post Office and the government should be doing more to bring to the attention of those victims that they have got the ability to get redress and get exonerated and have their convictions overturned. I really do think much more should be being done to financially support those people, but also to shine a light on their right to submit those claims to the CCRC in England and Wales and Northern Ireland, and of course in Scotland, who it's a separate organisation as well. So I think that the Post Office, I understand they did write to everybody who was convicted and say that there's now the ability to lodge a claim, but I think that needs to be pursued with more vigour and more enthusiasm, and I think more effort should be made by the government and the Post Office to do that.
Right, so in short, the government and Post Office should provide financial and legal support to get this moving forward. Okay, thanks. Just moving on, in terms of the compensation schemes for the victims of the rising scandal, in short, does it go far enough? And what else, again, should the Post Office be doing just to help postmasters?
Well, ultimately, I believe that the many hundreds of victims, and it's not just the ones that were prosecuted and convicted, it's also the people that paid back the losses week in, week out from the glitches in the system. I mean, this destroyed the livelihoods and the well-being of thousands of people. I think the Post Office have got to go significantly further here and do much better for those postmaster victims. After all, it's the actions of the Post Office that have created this situation, and it's not just the prosecutions, because many postmasters were frightened for their livelihoods. If they didn't put the money into the tills week in, week out to make good, then they were frightened they would have lost their jobs, they would have been prosecuted. So definitely much more should be done. But unfortunately, and I'm sure Nick Reed, the CEO, will also confirm this, Post Office hasn't got the money to compensate these people, and therefore the government is going to have to come up with more money for this situation. So, look, I think the Sir Win Williams inquiry is doing an excellent job to shine a light on these problems, but ultimately the compensation that's being offered is simply not good enough. People have had their lives destroyed, they've lost their homes, they've had marital problems, they've lost respect in the community. All of this situation, how do you put a price on compensating people for their lives being turned upside down for so many years? So I think so much more should be being done by both the Post Office and government, but ultimately the Post Office needs more money to be able to resolve this problem.
Thanks. And just one quick question on general operation of the Post Office. So I represent a constituency that's got a lot of rural villages, and I've noticed that a lot of Post Office franchises have effectively disappeared by the back door. So there should still be a Post Office there, but the Post Office say they can't get entity to operate the franchise from a shop. Quite often shop owners are telling me there's not enough incentive for them. So does the Post Office do enough to maintain these services in rural areas, or is this another rationalisation by stealth?
Well, this is why the Post Office should have a real good core of directly managed Crown Post Offices, because by franchising them to separate companies like RS McCall, when they decide to walk away from them, and there's no substitute replacement services, then the communities and the customers lose out. I do believe that we are really a tipping point here where services in urban and rural areas could be under a massive threat, where postmasters, whether they're franchises, part of a symbol group, or whether they're independently run, I think the whole Post Office network is under immense pressure, and significantly more needs to be done to put new work there, new revenue, new income, new transactions, and to diversify and become much better at what they do. You only got to look at the models of how post offices are run elsewhere on the continent. La Poste in France, the financial services that La Poste does actually is greater income and revenue than the mail side of the house. The other thing here is that, of course, there's been an artificial separation with the umbilical cord cut between Royal Mail and Post Office, where it was one entity. It's the only country in the world where the mails and parcels has been privatised, and the network, the retail, the Post Office has remained in government owned, and that's not helpful for both organisations. CW's policies, they should be brought back together again.
Okay, thank you. We're already over time, but I've got 2 bids for supplementaries. If colleagues could keep it to 2-3 minutes each maximum, please, otherwise I'll need to cut in. So I've got Mark Paulsine and I've got Ian Lavery.
I just want to come back to Mr Ward, if I may. Mr Ward, the Royal Mail has got two bits of business. It's got letter business and it's got parcels. Letters under massive pressure from people sending stuff by email now, so banks don't send out statements and people weren't even sending Christmas cards. So that volumes have decreased massively. And on parcels, Royal Mail have got some very agile competitors who are very flexible and able to adapt to the changes in the market. Given those pressures on the business that's available, your members, isn't it really dangerous for you to be taking the action you're taking at the moment?
We've not had any choice but to take the strike action because we are fighting for the future of the service. Our members' jobs are under threat. We're talking thousands upon thousands. Well, let me explain. What we want is an agreement that is about real modernisation. We had that agreement previously. So we would recognise the points that you're making. But with the company at the moment, they're not interested in building a proper growth strategy for the future. We will accept and move towards the position where the company can be agile, so a 24/7 network. But there's a fundamental disagreement. We do not believe the company should be abandoning the AM delivery period. So the point I think I would say to you is that what's crucial is that we have a strategy that's actually going to succeed in the future and not one that's just going to be satisfying shareholders in the short term.
Do you recognise the action you're taking is encouraging the customers of Royal Mail to seek alternative methods of getting whatever it is they want delivered?
Well, it's what I said earlier on. I would say to customers of Royal Mail that we're actually fighting for their services for the future. We're fighting for the universal
They've got plenty
service.
of alternatives to go to, Mr.
Well, that may be the case, and they'll have to make that decision.
Well, they're making that decision, and it's affecting...
From a trade union perspective, and from a worker perspective, and from the workforce who actually do care about the service, we're entitled to put forward our ideas on how the company can be successful in the future. And therefore, we've got to continue to be able to do that. Now, look, let's hope that negotiations can resolve this dispute. What that will take is the company stop imposing executive action and actually sit down with a union and do a genuine agreement that is in the interest of customers, the future of the company, as well as the workers. That's what we want.
Are you not worried that by the time you get there, the business will have shrunk so much that there will be redundancies?
Well, of course we're concerned about that situation, but the blame for that lies with the company. If they hadn't have...
Your members will suffer.
No, look, if they hadn't have reneged on the agreement, our members are suffering now under the plans that Royal Mail are putting forward, believe me.
Thank you. That was a good 3 minutes. Ian Lavery, 3 minutes.
And just very, very briefly, I think Mr. Ward's answered the question I was going to ask. There hasn't been a resolution to this dispute. What's the barriers? I think you have more or less explained it just in the last couple of minutes. What's the barriers and what's it going to take to resolve this dispute?
I think the barriers, number one, do the company actually want an agreement, or do they believe they can achieve success by imposing change without the support of the workforce? We believe that will be a catastrophic error. Two, that the strategy of the business must look to expand the role of postal workers. You can't shrink to greatness in a business like Royal Mail. You've got to utilise the existing infrastructure to build new products and new services. And we believe there are lots of examples of where we could be working with the company and using the skill and the experience and the trust that postal workers have on the doorstep to do exactly that. So the strategy is crucial going forward. Also on jobs, we cannot support an alternative resourcing model. Companies in the UK as big as Royal Mail, this country can't carry on with this type of levelling down approach. Whenever there's a problem, whenever people start to say, well, how do you solve this problem? The answer is well, you smash the business up and you just look after, break it up, sell bits of it off, bring in a new workforce on less terms and conditions. We're not going to accept that. Postal workers don't earn a fortune at the moment, but they're decent, hard-working people, and this can be a successful business if we get the right alignment and if the company listen to the views of the workforce and obviously what the union are putting forward as part of a deal for change.
Okay, thank you very much. That brings the first panel to an end. Dave Ward, Andy Furey, thank you so much for your time this morning. We're grateful. We're just going to swap over the seats and now I welcome Simon Thompson, who's the Chief Executive of Royal Mail, to the front. Get some water before we get going.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Thompson. Right, we will get going. Mr. Thompson, I understand from your record you were appointed in 2021, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And was this the first time you've been a CEO of a business?
It is as a CEO, but I've had extensive experience around the world in many different categories.
Why do you think your predecessor has criticised you in public for not having enough experience in mishandling the situation?
You know, I really believe in Royal Mail. I believe in the brand. I believe in the opportunity to grow the business. I think we've got an absolutely wonderful opportunity ahead of us. I think when the board made the appointment for me, it was around understanding the customer, understanding the digitisation of the business, and getting the changes that we need to win. And I was listening to the debate just before, and I think it's important just to home in on the changes that we need. You know, what I am doing and what the team are doing around me is making sure that we can compete in the parcels market. I think that the reality that we face is that letters were 20 billion letters a year we did back in 2003, 2004. They're now around about 8 billion. So our core business, as we had before, is we used to deliver two letters per day per household. We're now down to around about 1 letter per day for every other household. That business has really gone in massive decline, and during that period of time as well, the number of houses that we've delivered to has increased by around about 4 million, from around about 31 million to 4 million. So the reality is we are going to 10% more places, and yet our business is down 60%. So what I'm focused on and what the business is focused on now is growing in that parcels market. We've spent £900 million investing in to be able to compete in the parcels market. You know, we've got our great super hubs, we've increased our automation, we've made some great progress, but what we really need now is the change in the working practices so we can turn that investment into competing in, as has been said here at the committee, a hyper-competitive market.
Thank you. You didn't answer my question. My question was, why do you think your predecessor criticised you in public for not having enough experience and not handling this situation well?
Well, I think during this dispute, there's an awful lot of things have been said that have been very personal. I think that it's not necessary. I don't think it's nice. And it doesn't change the fact that what we need to do is change the business and compete in the parcels market. And that's what myself and my team are definitely focused on.
Just now you said to the committee that you were appointed as CEO because you understand your customers and digital solutions. You didn't say workers. Do you understand your workers, Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I've really dedicated my time to as I've been the CEO has been out and about actually with the workforce. I'm out and about on a frequent basis, generally absolutely every week. I also put in place Workplace as well, which I know was referenced earlier on. We have around about 50,000 of our team on Workplace, and it's great that they've now got a voice. And what we put on that platform is real key information about the changes that we need. And it's always good to get their reaction. Now, of course, I understand that I will always explain the changes that we need. I understand that that is not always welcome, but I think it's really important that we have an open dialogue with the workforce.
Why were you given a bonus of £140,000 last year?
Yeah, the bonus that was paid to me last year was based on the business performance last year and based on the criteria that was set by the remuneration committee at that point in time.
When I looked at the long-term investment plan parameters for the calculation of your bonus, I'd noted that the board had changed the way they measure your performance. So traditionally it would be looking at revenue, profit, service level, delivery. I understand it's been changed to just shareholder value. Is that why you dished out so many millions of pounds last year instead of investing it into the business? Because it creates the opportunity for you to get a larger bonus?
No, not at all. In fairness, my bonuses are based on improving the business constitution, changing the revenue, growing the profitability, and also improving in areas such as CO2. But, you know, I'll come back to what I said.
Can I just check? Because if I've misunderstood, then I'll apologise. But I'd read that for 2022-23, the long-term investment programme for bonuses for you and your colleagues on the board had been changed because, according to the organisation, it couldn't accurately measure your performance on revenue and profits because of the state of affairs at Royal Mail, and therefore it only looked at shareholder value. Is that not right?
No, my incentives are based on making sure that we deliver good quality to the customer and also make sure that we grow the business.
And so there wasn't that change?
No, there was that change, and I understand the point you're making. But in terms of what I focus on every day, what I'm focused on every day is making sure that we can give the best jobs in town and the long-term job security for the team. And we really do need that change. And it's not change that I'm doing for change's sake. It's change based on the changing needs of the customers and the reality that's around us.
The point I'm trying to get to is that you are incentivised as the CEO of Royal Mail purely by delivering value for shareholders. It doesn't really depend on how you get that. I mean, ideally you would get shareholder value because you run a profitable, happy, successful business. But actually, if you cut costs, cut investments, cut the workforce, and still deliver a large dividend, you still do well out of that, don't you?
No, what I'm focused on, as I said before, is changing the business so we can compete in the parcels market. And we've invested that £900 million. I'm pleased to say that our super hub in Warrington has come on stream, and that is working very well. The other investments we're making in the Midlands with the super hub is also coming on well. We've grown our parcels automation from some 20-odd%. It's now up to over 70%. What we need is the ways of working so that we can really compete in the market. And I'd also like to add as well that during my time here as CEO, we've really led the initiative around low CO2 for parcel, the next battleground that is out there. And it's great to be able to report that because of our feet on the street model and our investment in electric vehicles, that we're really leading in this initiative. And that's something that'll be good for the future of the business as well as society.
Well, I congratulate you on that, but if you don't have any workers, Mr. Thompson, I'm not sure it's all going to go very well. In terms of your transformation plan, which external advisors are advising you on the transformation of Royal Mail?
We do have a number of advisors, but when I came in from a CEO's perspective, I've changed an awful lot of the executive team.
External advisors, Mr. Thompson.
No, I understand, but one of the things...
My questions, if you could answer it, please.
Well, we do have some external advisors, like all large organisations such as us. The point I would like to make is that...
My question is which external advisors? I'm not asking you to make a different point. I'm asking you to answer my question.
Well, we have an awful lot of external advisors that do advise us. A lot of those agreements are actually a confidential thing. I think that if
which advisors are advising you on the transformation of Royal Mail?
If the committee would like some more information on that, then we'll certainly...
That's why I'm asking you the question. What's the answer, please?
We'd certainly write to you and give you that information.
Why can't you tell me now?
Because some of those agreements that we have with the external organisations have an element of confidentiality, and I don't want to make a mistake here and get that wrong, but we'll certainly write...
Well, I'd encourage you. You're covered by parliamentary privilege, Mr. Thompson, so no one can sue you. That's why you can give us honest answers. The reason I'm asking this question is because if you look at the wider industry, a certain set of external consultants and advisors are advising all businesses to invest in technology and automated devices, in reducing headcount for workers, in using self-employed drivers, in cutting costs, and all of the things that we're seeing at Royal Mail. And you might see that in Amazon or Every or other types of companies where this committee has heard testimony of working conditions being entirely unacceptable for those people. You're just following a similar track, aren't you? Because you're being advised by probably those same consultants.
No, I don't agree with that. I don't think that's the case at all here. We're very, very proud that 97% of our team are actually full-time employees. We're very proud of the fact that we give the best terms and conditions in town, and there are things that we are determined to maintain.
What does PVA stand for, Mr. Thompson?
I don't know, actually. I apologise. I don't know what that stands for.
I was told by one of your employees that, I don't know what PVA stands for, but it sounds similar to what Amazon uses, and they gave testimony to us about this a few weeks ago. Apparently it's a bit of technology that tracks how quickly your staff are processing packages and letters and getting them out the door, and that you're using technology to decide on the length of routes, the speed at which they should go. And I've been told by some of your workers that they're having to run from door to door because the technology is telling them they need to be quicker. Do you have that technology in place, Mr. Thompson?
No, I'm not aware of technology that we have in place that tells people to work more quickly. I'm not aware of that at all.
You've not used technology and automation to decide the size of routes?
No, we do have a revisions exercise in place where we have a look at the volumes that are required in routes. And this is normal standard business practice and something that we've done for absolutely many years to make sure that the workload for each individual route is actually equal between each of the team. And one thing that I see when I go out, and I get asked the question very often, is that why is it that some walks might be 2 hours long and some walks might also be 4 hours long? And what we do is a regular revision exercise to make sure that those walks are equal.
And so you're telling the committee that your members of staff don't carry bits of technology, whatever that might be, that tracks how quickly they're doing their job?
No, they do. They do have a PDA, and that PDA does actually...
It was a PDA, not a PVA. Did I mishear on the phone when someone called me? So you do know what a PDA is, do you?
Yes, I do.
What is that?
Yeah, a PDA is a device that our workers will have, which actually helps them in terms of knowing where to go in their route and also might be scanning items at the doorstep.
You are doing exactly the same as other employers such as Amazon and using technology in this way.
No, well, we do use technology, which is a normal course of our business that we do. But the point that you're making about, does this device tell people to go more quickly is not something that we do. But of course...
Why are you tracking the speed at which employees are doing their work if you're not using that for any purpose?
Well, what we do is, of course, from a customer's perspective, what a customer wants is something called an estimated delivery window. What we need to do with that technology is make sure, which is based on the needs of the customer, that the customer has an idea of the window when it is that that product is actually going to be arrived. But we do not use that technology in any form of way that when anyone returns back to the office in some form of penal way. That is not what we do.
Okay. Mr. Thompson, you're quite good at evading my questions. The points I wanted to make today was that your bonus package had been changed in order to just focus purely on shareholder value, that you're using external consultants to do what's happening in the rest of the industry, and you're using technology in a way that adds enormous amount of stress onto your workforce. I think the answers to all of those questions have in the long run been yes. And I would just politely suggest to you that when we've talked to other businesses doing that, it doesn't really go in the interests of the business, their customers. It's not the best way to go. So I'll ask you one more time, for all the criticism that's been levied at you for mishandling this situation in the state of affairs at Royal Mail, do you not have any humility to recognise that it's really not been going very well since you were appointed CEO?
I think that clearly there are some things that have not gone as well as we would want it. I totally understand that. I think as a CEO of any business, there is no one...
We wanted. Isn't it your responsibility, Mr. Thompson?
Well, of course, I am accountable for the business. I don't think anyone would have wanted the disruption that we've had for our customers over the last 9 months. I think that's absolutely clear.
Thank you. Ruth Edwards, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Thompson, can you explain the cyber incident that happened at Royal Mail on the 11th of January, which stopped letters and parcels being delivered overseas?
Yes, what I'd first like to say is an apology to our customers that have been disrupted by this particular incident. The second thing is I'd like just to give a thank you to the national security agencies that have been supporting us in this particular incident as well. The other thing is, just to make it clear for the committee, is that I have been told that to discuss any fine details or any additional details on this particular topic at this point in time would actually be detrimental. The situation that we have is that for export parcels and letters through our postal services, that we are no longer able to provide that service. But our domestic reality is that nothing has changed. All of those services are working well. And from an import perspective as well, that everything is working exactly as it is that we need. So that is the situation we're at. What we said to our customers within a day of realising what it is that had gone on with the cyber incident, because of course we have to validate that it's not other things. What we've asked our customers to do is not to send us any letters and parcels at this point in time for postal export, and that situation and advice remains the same today.
Thank you. So do I take it from your comments that the incident is still ongoing then? It hasn't been resolved?
No, the incident is still ongoing. The investigations are ongoing in terms of the impact of it. But my sense is, and the team have been working on workarounds so that we can get the service up and running again, that I think in the very near future we'll have some more news to share.
In the very near future, it's already been down for a number of days now. When do you think you'll get it up and running again?
As I said, in the very, very near future, we believe that we'll be able to give some more information to the customers around the workarounds that we've implemented.
Okay, so you don't know. And obviously, if you're working with the national security agencies, I think we can safely say then that you've experienced a cyber attack.
Yes, that's right. We've confirmed that we've had a cyber attack, yes.
And has there been any breach of personal customer data as a result of this cyber attack?
Yeah, based on our investigations so far, we believe that there's been no compromising of any form of customer personal information. As a precaution, we did let the ICO know straight away. If that situation should change, then of course we let the customers and the authorities know immediately.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ian Lavery, please.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to say, I think Mr Thompson's being absolutely disingenuous when he mentions the tagging, because that's what it is. Posties are tagged. If they are on their route and there's a bit of a gap of delivery, they're hauled into the office and ask for explanations. Would you deny that?
That's not my understanding. That's not something I'm aware of, no.
So you see it's not happening?
Not to my awareness, no.
Well, that's astonishing coming from the Chief Executive, not understanding that the posties of today are basically tagged during the time of their employment from morning till the end of their delivery.
No, I don't think that's the case. We have technology in place to make sure that it assists people in terms of the routes on where they go. It's actually very, very helpful for people that are new starters as well. And I'm not aware of any form of penal system, I think, that you've described that would say that at the end of a walk that somebody would be, I can't remember the words you used.
See it hauled into the office.
Hauled into the office
Yes.
is not something that is our standard practice, that's for sure.
Okay, so I'm just referring to the financial viability of Royal Mail, and it's a massive concern, particularly under your watch, Mr Thompson. Up to March 22, the company made £758 million profit. £567 million was given to shareholders immediately. There was any consideration whatsoever in the halcyon days of £758 million to even think about rewarding the people who provided the service and provided that profit. You basically immediately doled it out to shareholders and dividend holders. I mean, that's extraordinary. And then within days might be an exaggeration, but certainly weeks, the Royal Mail then announced a loss of £1 million per day. That's absolutely incredible, I've got to say. And at the same time, under your watch, under the watch of Mr Thompson, Chief Executive of Royal Mail, you announced redundancies, tens of thousands of redundancies. You want to introduce agency workers on insecure contracts. Every single performance target in the last 2 years was missed by your company under your stewardship for the last 2 years. And as already has been explained, the former Royal Mail Chief Executive recently said that you were extremely inexperienced and labelled the leadership of Royal Mail as toxic and confrontational. Do you really think that you're a fitting, proper person to run this national infrastructure company?
I think I want to roll back to some of the information that you've mentioned there. I think if we go back to the point of privatisation, Royal Mail, between our group of Royal Mail and GLS, Royal Mail in the UK made around about 83% of the turnover, represented 83% of the turnover in the business. From a profitability perspective, it was around about 73%. Where we're actually at today is that Royal Mail in the UK, from a turnover perspective, is about 60%. But from a profitability perspective, it is zero. As you've quite rightly identified, we are losing £1 million a day. I think in terms of the dividends that you've mentioned there, was back in 2018 when we actually started to cut the dividend payment based on how it was that Royal Mail in the UK was actually performing. During COVID, there was no dividend that was paid. And the dividend that was actually paid, that you referred to there, was paid by GLS, the organisation that is now, very, very profitable. And it is GLS that paid all of that dividend. From an investments perspective, since privatisation, we've invested around about £2 billion. And £700 million in the last 3 years, and under my watch, £441 million in our future, including our super hubs, our electric vehicles, and also automation. And, we've really invested in the organisation to make sure we can grow. During the time of COVID as well, when the shareholders did not get a dividend, we also paid 2.7% in terms of a pay increase to our workers as well.
You accept that the former chief executive said that your style of leadership is toxic and confrontational?
No, I don't think we're toxic and confrontational at all. And what I would say is that what we're really, really focused on is making sure that we can meet the needs of the customer and we can grow this business, which we all want. And I heard Dave talk about it as well, and I'm totally aligned with that, absolutely aligned that we want to grow the business and give our team the long-term job security they deserve. And we'll only do that through changing and growing the business and also maintaining the best conditions in town. And that's what we want to do.
You understand why lots of the posties who have done a fantastic job, who in many ways are looking to advance the company more than what the management are themselves. Do you understand their anxieties that Mr Thompson, the chief executive, is on 23 times their average earnings, and as the chair said, got a bonus of £140,000 at a time when as I've already said, I'm not going back over the old ground, basically failed as a company, £750 million profit days after they're making £1 million loss. Are you really worth that amount of money, Mr Thompson?
The £758 million you mentioned was made at a group level. Royal Mail in the UK made £416 million of that £758 million. In terms of the pay ratio you mentioned, it's 23 to 1 is my pay versus the posties pay. Our average posties take home £25,700 a year, between 18 and 40% more than the market norm. I have to say, from a personal perspective and from a CEO perspective, I think it's very positive that these pay ratios have to be reported. And I know it's something that the Remuneration Committee chair keeps a very, very close eye on.
I mean, it's very, very good, very kind. You're saying it's good that it's reported. That really wasn't a question. I said, were you worth it?
I think that
for the obvious financial failure of Royal Mail, who you've already said is facing extreme difficulties under your watch. How do you get a bonus for that?
Well, last year is different to this year. This year we are losing £1 million a day. The situation is a very serious situation, which is why it is that we're very focused on the change that we need to meet the needs of the customer. And as I said before, we've done the investment in the infrastructure, that £900 million over the last 3 years. What we now need is the ways of working change to go with it from the team, so that we can turn that into a real growing business. And the only other thing to add as well is a lot of the changes that we are requesting from our delivery staff are already well embedded in our organisation in processing and other parts of the business as well.
Can I ask another brief question? It's being suggested in the press that Royal Mail executives have been boasting about this war chest of £1.76 billion. It's been suggested that perhaps this is a union busting fund. Would you like to comment on that?
The £1.7 billion that was referenced was not a war chest. What was actually referenced was that it was liquidity or access to money that the organisation could have. But like any access to money, whether it be a loan or a mortgage that you would have yourself, you have to pay it back. So what we need to do is turn around Royal Mail in the UK, get it back to a profitable trajectory, and then, yes, there is access to money so that we can continue to invest and grow the business. On the union busting side of things, I just want to make it really clear there is more than one union at Royal Mail. We also have Unite, a union that we partner with. What we did with Unite this year is have one of the largest organisational changes that we've ever had in our history. In fact, it's the first time that we changed our frontline management structure for 35 years. Some of the agreements in there were over 40 years old. And I'm pleased to say that working alongside Unite, we delivered that change very successfully that makes us fit for the future. And we also agreed a pay deal with Unite as well, which was aligned with what we've offered the CWU, and that was agreed within 3 weeks. So I think that we can absolutely work with unions very well, and have shown that to be the case.
The final question on the universal service obligation. We had the Secretary of State here a couple of weeks ago, and he was asked if the company, Royal Mail, had written asking for the 6-day delivery to be reduced to 5 days, and he said that there's no way that the government would accept it, and had said that the Royal Mail weren't going to stop pursuing. They tried to get rid of the USO.
Well, the first thing to say is we're very, very proud to be the provider of the USO. We have no issue with that at all. I'm sorry, I didn't miss the question.
Why are you trying to dilute the USO if you're very, very proud of what it achieves?
Mm-hmm. Well, what we want to make sure is two things. When the company was privatised, there were two conditions around that from a USO perspective. The first one was that the USO would be viable. And the viability measure that was set on the USO was that the Royal Mail would make between 5 and 10% return. We've done that in 2 years since privatisation. So there is a viability question. The other side of things as well is what is it that the customer wants? And we've talked about the changes in letter volumes during this period of time as well. There was an Ofcom user needs review that was done a few years ago. And what the Ofcom user needs review said was very, very clear, was that a 5-day service was something that would meet the needs of 97% of people. And again, if you looked across different locations in the country and different demographics, the feedback was exactly the same. And when we did our research, what the customer also said to us is they want a 7-day parcel service that goes everywhere for the same price, to and from their doorstep, low CO2, with deliveries by the trusted postie that everyone loves. And Dave mentioned trust to the doorstep earlier on, and I'm totally aligned on that as well. So what we want is a viable USO and a one that also meets the needs of the customers. And everything that we've seen is that means that 5 days would be fine. When I spend time out and about with our posties as well, I think they also recognise that maybe 5 days would also be fine.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Andy MacDonald, please.
Thanks, Chair. Am I right, Mr Thompson, in saying we've declared that you have a bonus of £140,000? What's your salary again? What's your base salary?
£540,000.
And then £140,000 on top of that. Thank you. But despite the job losses that Royal Mail's announced, it's introduced owner-drivers into the business. They're on approximately 20% less pay and insecure contracts. And you've retained and recruited thousands of agency staff. So postal workers are going to lose their jobs while casualised workers replace them. That's fire and replace, isn't it?
No, there is no fire and rehire, I think is the phrase. That's
no, I didn't say fire and rehire. I said fire and replace. Those people are gone. They're out the door. They're bulleted. You're getting people back on casualised labour. Is that the way to run a cherished national asset such as Royal Mail?
I apologise, I'd misunderstood this. I apologise. No, that's not what we're doing at all. As I said before, we've got 97% full-time employment, which is something that we want. I think in terms of the agency workers, we did have 18 days of industrial action, and we did have to make sure that we kept our service running. And that did mean that we had to increase our level of agency workers to make sure we could keep the service running during industrial action days as well. Now, what I'm pleased to report, and it was something that Dave and I discussed, was that we would reduce those agency workers, which we've rapidly done. And we're back in talks now. We're very pleased that we're back in talks now, and it would be good to get an agreement as soon as we can.
Well, that's pleasing to hear that you're talking. One of the reasons that you cited was the operating loss of between 350 and 450 million in 2022 half-year results was a direct result of the industrial action. So what's stopping you from reaching an agreement with the CWU to end the dispute?
Well, we would love to get an agreement, and I'm delighted that we are back in talks. And, Dave called me just before New Year. We had a conversation actually on New Year's Eve, and I'm delighted that has led to where we are. I think in terms of where we've got to, we have now made 12 concessions, including an increased pay offer and also items such as voluntary working on a Sunday. I don't want to prejudice where we are with those talks, but we've got some more days to go. And I think that we should, keep our efforts to try and get an agreement. What we really need here is everybody pointing in the same direction so that we can reinvent Royal Mail for the next generations, which means we can compete in that parcels market. And as I've said before, we've got the infrastructure in place. It's there ready. It's coming on stream. We're making progress with it, but we must have the ways of working. And it's an urgent situation because I think, as everyone here on the committee will understand, £1 million a lost day is not something that is sustainable forever.
Okay. So if you've got those losses, why did you distribute? Was it 760 million? That was distributed to shareholders in 21-22. If Royal Mail is financially unstable, how on earth is that possible?
That was paid out of GLS's profits, as I referenced earlier on.
So you carved the business up to justify those costs. What about the sick pay that you're going to be giving? Because you've announced that you want to reduce sick pay for postal workers. Don't you acknowledge that by cutting sick pay, you endanger them and their family, as well as creating extra pressure on the NHS? It's the Royal Mail. You've got duties beyond any other business. You're not any other business. You're the Royal Mail. How can you take such a step against your own workers? My colleagues talked about your £1.3 billion war chest. Is this a really fit and proper way to run such an important business as Royal Mail?
We don't have the war chest, as I mentioned earlier on. That was access to liquidity. I think in terms of sickness...
Well, the Telegraph described it as a war chest, and it was the Royal Mail stating to its own investors that it had that money. Are you saying that the Telegraph are lying? Or they've been misinformed?
A correction was made on that particular article. And picking up your point around sick pay, our current sickness levels that we have in the organisation is around about 3 times the norm if you look at ONS results. I think if we have a look at the vast majority of our team, and it is a magnificent team, they take around about 1.5 days worth of sick absence per year. Our sickness policy is significantly more than any of the competition. In fact, in some of the competition, if you don't turn in when you're sick, you get no pay at all. What we have is over the first 6 months, you can get full pay. For the following 6 months, you can get half pay. Those things do not change. And for the first 3 days of absence in any year, you would get full pay. But what we recognise is that an enormous amount of our sickness is actually in a small proportion of the team. So what we are currently discussing is a change in the sickness scheme to encourage people to come back to work. And I think we should touch on it, what we talked about earlier on. We need everyone back to work, as many people back to work, as long as they are fit and healthy, of course, because that is how we can make sure we can deliver a quality of service.
So you're not going to cut sick pay at all? You're not going to make any changes that would reduce workers' sick pay whilst they're absent due to ill health? Not a penny?
Our overall sickness policy is much better than competition.
I asked you the question, are you going to make any cuts to sick pay? It's either a yes or a no.
No, we are in discussions about how it is that we can make some adjustments that would only impact a small proportion of the team to encourage them back to work.
That sounds to me like a yes. You are going to cut the sick pay for those workers.
We are discussing how it is that our sick policies can encourage as many people back to work as possible. And also, it's worth understanding that we spend around about £250 million a year on sickness, and our sickness level is 3 times the industry norm.
Just finally, do you not understand, Mr. Thompson, that by giving these sorts of evasive and avoiding answers, you played fast and loose with the chair's questions about the technology, about the acronym that was used? Shouldn't you have come in and said, no, actually what we have is X or PD or whatever it is? If you're forthright and candid with us, are we then going to be able to trust you? At the moment, these sorts of responses where you don't give straight answers to very simple questions is really causing us some considerable difficulty. Do you not see that?
I can understand that the situation is tense. I would always like to answer as best as I can. I'm hoping that I'm answering the questions in a way that's acceptable to the committee.
Not to me, it isn't. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Forgive me just for asking maybe a simple question, but when was the decision taken to separate the parcels, the international parcels business, from the USO obligations?
I'm not sure of the question, I'm sorry.
From your evidence today, as I understand it, you've got a profitable kind of parcels business. You called it GLS, right?
Sorry.
And then you've got the letters business, the USO, which you've been trying to reduce your obligations under with the government. When was the decision taken to separate the two?
Well, they've always been two separate organisations, been separate for some time.
Since privatisation?
Yes, they have always been run as separate businesses. The GLS business has a chief executive, and the Royal Mail has a chief executive, which is me.
So I think what you've been saying is the GLS bit is profitable and viable, but I think you said earlier there are viability concerns about the Royal Mail bit.
Yes, I think that's right. But what I would say, and we presented to the market back in November time, a turnaround plan for Royal Mail in the UK. It can be a very, very profitable and business that flourishes, but we just need the changes that are based on the customer's needs to make it that way.
Okay. It just reminds me a bit of the buses, Mr. Thompson. When buses were privatised, the bus company CEOs say, we've got a profitable route here, but we can't cross-subsidise to the routes over here that are not profitable. And so then you cut the routes that are not profitable, and then local communities, often low-income local communities, have no bus. And then the CEOs come to government and the taxpayer and say, we can't cross-subsidise the profitable routes. We can take the profits, but we can't cross-subsidise. Can you give us some taxpayers' money to pay for the buses for people over here that need it? It feels like a very similar conversation here. I think you're going to probably be wanting to ask the government for more money or a reduction in the USO or something to make the bit that you've described as being potentially unviable viable, aren't you?
No, I don't think that's the case. I've been clear on our position on the USO from 6 days to 5 days on the basis of viability and customer need. That is something that we have absolutely asked for. But there is a great future for Royal Mail. The reason I took the job is that I absolutely believe in the business, that it can compete and flourish in the market. You know, we do have some great advantages. Dave mentioned it earlier on, that we go everywhere. I think that's a massive advantage, and we've got great infrastructure as well. We've also innovated in some really great services. You know, we're uniquely positioned to implement parcel collect. You know, Dave talked about the fact that we want a bigger role for postal workers. I agree with him. You know, parcel collect, being able to pick something up at the doorstep instead of someone having to drive and park to hand over a parcel, I think is a magical thing and something that's uniquely ours. We've also appointed a managing director of Royal Mail Medical, so we are looking to build some new businesses as well on the basis that we go everywhere, and also the fact that we have that trusted relationship.
Okay, thank you. Jane Thompson, please. Sorry, not Jane Thompson, Jane Hunt. I don't know Jane Thompson.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson. I've got a couple of questions, if I may, on service performance. And so, first of all, the Q2 performance figures in 2022 were not great from what I can gather, and targets were missed. However, Mr. Ward, the General Secretary of the CWU, said in his submission earlier on that reform plans were torn up in September and that there was a power struggle. Talk me through that. What's going on in Q2, and then what is happening about this torn up plans, and what's happening in terms of a power struggle?
Yes, I think it's true. And we can see that if we have a look at our quality of service in Q1, I think in terms of first class it was 85%, and in second class it was 96%, actually very, very close to the target that we have set. And I'd also say to the committee and everyone else as well, is it's always a disappointment to me, and it's something we're very committed to achieving those targets, however stretching that they can be. What happened in Q2 is that our performance was lower. It was 71% for first class, and I think from memory it was around about 92% for second class. Now, that was disrupted by industrial action at the end. I think that's the case. And I think, you know, if we have a look, particularly in December, as a for instance, we had 7 days of industrial action out of the 23 days up until Christmas. You know, we, during that period of time, will deliver around about 30 to 40 million letters on a day. So clearly any form of disruption is going to have a major issue on the quality of service reality. But I am also pleased to say that during the industrial action phases, we totally changed the way that we did our sortation automation in our machines to make sure we prioritised NHS letters and the likes. And we delivered around about 34.5 million of those critical letters during that industrial action period by prioritising them.
Thank you, and thank you very much for doing that with the NHS letters, actually. I was aware of that, and it made a huge difference, I feel sure. So my second question follows on quite well, actually, from that. I didn't appreciate that you'd made a deal with Unite within 3 weeks, and yet CWU are yet to come to an agreement here. So what is the impact of the CWU strikes on the future performance and development of the business, and indeed the competitiveness of the whole company?
I think it was referenced earlier on, is the thing that we need to understand, and I spend an awful lot of time with our retailer customers as well, asking them what it is that they want. And what they really, really need is a quality service and regularity and confidence, and things can be delivered. And it's absolutely true to say that during industrial action, at a press of a button, that they will make a decision to protect their business and their customers, and that business has gone elsewhere. But the other thing that they tell me, and they tell me on a very regular basis, is that what we are building in terms of our infrastructure, the ability to take an e-commerce order at midnight, deliver it the next day with low CO2, and delivered by a postie that they trust, is a magical thing. So the realities from the retailers is they are having to make choices that I don't think they would like to make. I think the choice that they would prefer to make is put their business with Royal Mail, because what we are building is exactly what they want.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ruth Edwards, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Thompson, you focused a lot in this session on parcels and the profitability of parcels. So would it be fair to say then that reports in the media and from constituents that postal workers have been told to prioritise parcels over letters are accurate? Is that now official Royal Mail policy?
No, that's absolutely not true. We've been very, very clear that there is no difference between the two. We've written to our teams on a regular basis. I actually wrote a letter, I remember when I first came in my first year, to every postal worker, reminding them of the importance of letters. But we do have to recognise one thing, particularly after days of industrial action. For anyone who's been to one of our delivery offices, you'll all remember the frames. Within the frames, we are 100% optimised for letters. There's somewhere to store letters, but we are not at all optimised for parcels. So we do have occasions at a local level where, for health and safety reasons, there might be a situation where parcels need to be delivered so that the postal workers can actually get to the frames. But that's not our policy at all. Our policy is very, very clear that letters and parcels are equal.
It's interesting, though, because this situation arose in Rushcliffe, and I commented in the local media about it. And as a result, I was contacted by postal workers from across the country, actually, who said the opposite, and who said that they have been specifically told to prioritise parcels. Why do you think it is that so many of them have been told something different to what is official Royal Mail policy?
I don't know the answer to that question. All I will say is that our policy is very, very clear, that parcels and letters are as important. And as I said earlier on, we're very, very proud to deliver the USO service, and we do understand that quality is important for letters and also for parcels.
Citizens Advice have submitted evidence to the committee ahead of this session, and their data has found that customers are far more likely to experience delays to letters than they are to parcels. Does that bear out in your internal data?
No, I don't believe it does, but I think if the committee would like any more information on that topic, we can certainly write to you. But I did see that information from Citizens Advice as well. And it was actually thanks to the Citizens Advice recommendation some year ago that we actually changed our service update page to make sure that if there are any issues in any delivery offices, we're very proactive and we let people know.
Thank you. I think the committee would like to see that information, actually, in terms of delays to letters as opposed to parcels. And I think we need to put this, this issue to bed once and for all, in a way. So what will Royal Mail be doing, given that there is this confusion as to whether parcels are to be prioritised over letters or not? What will you be doing to set the record straight and to make sure that everybody knows that that isn't the case?
Well, we've always been very clear. It's very clear in our policies.
How can you be being very clear if so many people have the wrong end of the stick?
Yes, well, it might be time to re-communicate again. But, I mean, we've always been very, very clear that that is the situation, and that is our policies through our managers and also with our people. We've been very clear about that.
Can I take it from what you're saying then that there will be a new communication now from Royal Mail to make it very clear that parcels shouldn't be being prioritised over letters, because obviously people missing letters are missing incredibly important information about NHS appointments, paying bills, all sorts of things?
Yes, we're very happy to re-communicate our policy that we've re-communicated several times. I think that's perfectly fine.
Thank you.
Mr Thompson, I'm a bit confused because a whistleblower wrote to me only last week, once we'd advertised that this session was happening, to tell me that you do, in fact, prioritise parcels over letters. And in fact, he sent me a picture of a poster that's on his rack in one of your offices, and I'll just read you what it says here. This is from last week, where it says, "The future is parcels. Unless your manager directs you otherwise, these are your priorities on delivery each day. Number 1, premium items and collections. Number 2, large parcels. Number 3, lapsing, including all parcels. And number 4, at least half of the delivery points on your frame, including letters." So letters are ranked number 4 in the priority list, and only half of them. So you're unilaterally only delivering on 50% of your USO, aren't you, Mr. Thompson?
I'm actually aware of that particular correspondence, which was done in one delivery office, and it was dealt with, and it was a local action.
But this isn't true. Who wrote this poster, Mr. Thompson?
That is absolutely not our policy.
Well, it's on a Royal Mail poster that your workers are being asked to read when they go to work. If that's not Royal Mail policy, how else do you communicate Royal Mail policy?
That is absolutely not our policy.
I'd remind you, Mr. Thompson, that misleading Parliament is not something that we appreciate here on the committee. And I think if this is not the case, you're going to need to write to us with sufficient details afterwards to prove that that's changed. Mark Pawsey, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Thompson, we've heard about the dynamic marketplace you're operating in, and just wondering whether, you've got a workforce who's been with you for some time in many cases. I mean, in fact, when I visited my sorting office, they told me that a postie stayed for either 6 months or their entire working career, and many of them do choose to stay there for a long time. Do you think that the workforce understands the changes in the market and the needs to put the customer first?
Well, our average tenure of service is around about 17 years, which is something we're really proud about. Yes. And I think that helps us massively with the trust at the doorstep and the relationships as well. So we're very happy about that reality. But we do also need to recognise that if you've done a job in a certain way for a period of time, the change can actually be quite difficult. But what we've also done, and we've worked with the CWU on this particular topic, if you take Sunday working as for instance, we've made it voluntary. So we are making sure that any changes that we are proposing is something that people can work with and can adjust to over time. But, the realities of a parcel market is very different to a letters market, and I'll give you a very practical example. The latest posting time for a letter could be 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon, would be our traditional reality. The reality is now in the parcels e-commerce market, those deliveries are at midnight. And of course, we have to get those items to everybody the next day. So that's a 6-hour difference. So what we are discussing is how it is can we get later start times, sometimes up to an hour, maybe 2 hours, maybe 3 hours, so that we can make sure that those parcels, which is now 60% of our revenue, can get to the customer in the right way for the right day, because that's what they need.
My question is, do you think that the workforce and their representatives recognise the nature of that change, or is that part of the obstacle to finding a way through the present problems?
Well, I think it's an obstacle, and I think it's something that's going to need more explanation. But what I would also say, and when I'm out and about in the operation, the posties will say it to me quite often, that when they are home in the afternoon, I think they recognise when they look out of their windows that they can see the competitors delivering. And of course, those competitors are delivering business that we could be doing and we want to do.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Thompson, if I might politely say so, I've not been very pleased with your answers today. I know this is a difficult job for you, but it's really important that you answer questions clearly and, might I say, as honestly as possible, because your performance gives us grave concern, really, about the narrative that you've provided today on many of my questions today, including when there's clear evidence to the contrary. You've suggested that what we've been told, what the evidence suggests just isn't true. Something has to be true, and I'm not sure what that is. So I wish you the best in resolving this dispute. I hope that you take our concerns and questions seriously, and if this dispute and these issues are not resolved in a timely fashion, we may have to call you back to ask for further questions and updates. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. We're now moving on to panel 3, and we'll welcome Nick Reed, who's the Chief Executive of Post Office Limited. Mr. Reed, good morning. We'll just let everyone get settled. Hopefully you've got a clean cup
thank you.
of water. Great. We're going to start off today with Charlotte Nichols, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Mr. Reid. According to Citizens Advice Analysis, 1 in 3 rural post offices are now provided as part-time outreaches, and in the last 10 years, the number of permanent branches has reduced by more than 1,000. What impact do you believe that this is having on the post office's ability to serve people in vulnerable circumstances and those who rely most on the network and its role as a social and economic hub?
Fair question. Let me first start by saying the targets that were set by the government, which are access criteria, so we should have 99% of the population within 3 miles of a post office and 90% of the population within 1 mile of a post office. And there are a series of other metrics that are specific to vulnerable, rural, isolated and urban degenerative areas where we have post offices in place. And over the last 3 years, we've succeeded in delivering against those targets. So I recognise and acknowledge that the physical infrastructure of a post office is not always possible, particularly in rural areas, and we do our best to provide an outreach service, which is what we use especially in rural and extreme rural areas, where we actually go out and visit vulnerable, isolated communities or individuals indeed. And we establish post offices, mobile post offices, or they can be post offices in libraries or post offices in pubs or community centres. So it's a way of ensuring that where it's not viable, and I use the word advisedly, there isn't the customer demand or there isn't the social demand to have a physical infrastructure or a post office within a convenience store or another retail outlet, we have the opportunity, obviously, to produce outreaches and have an outreach service. And you're right, the outreach service has increased, but I would stress that the overall access criteria, and I know that last week when Minister Hollinrake was in the Westminster Hall debate, he made it very clear that the 11,500 was a target for post offices that he wanted to ensure remained, and we're looking forward to working with him to ensure that is the case. We still, as of today, have 11,671 post offices that are up and running.
Thank you. We have been made aware of a number of instances where post office branches have been temporarily closed but have never reopened, which has effectively meant permanent closure of branches without consultation with local communities or indeed their workforce. Is that a deliberate policy? And in what circumstances would the post office consider reopening branches which have closed temporarily?
I know that the Citizens Advice and ourselves have had a number of conversations around what exactly is a temporary closure, and I think it is a little disingenuous as a term. Just to be very clear on this topic, we are not obliged, or the post office is not obliged, to automatically replace a like-for-like post office if it closes, or indeed open another post office in the immediate area. Clearly, we would want to. That is our objective. Our objective very much, and the standards that are set for us, is that we have access criteria and that we have 11,500 post offices. The situation that we have with temporary closures is we invariably want to open a post office in the same location when it closes. It's not always possible, primarily because the majority of our estate, 99% of our estate, are run by franchisees, and sometimes they go bust, sometimes postmasters retire, sometimes they're just simply not viable, and we get little or no warning as to when they're going to close. And I think we had the example earlier on of McColl's, where 55 of the post offices have shut, and clearly that's something then we have to run fast to try and address and try and replace. So we're speaking with Citizens Advice about this term temporary. I think it is a little misleading, and we want to make sure that we're all agreed what does temporary mean and when we replace post offices. But I would reiterate, this year we have had less turnover in post offices than we have done for 8 years. So the churn, as we call it in terms of post offices, we've only had 168 this year that have churned, which we are very pleased about. It's obviously a reflection on the fact that we are working hard to make sure we're serving rural and urban communities as best we can.
Thank you. I'm interested particularly in constituencies like mine, which don't have a single banking branch within them, and so therefore there's much greater reliance on the post office for banking facilities. That I'm wanting to know what the post office is going to do to provide these communities, and again we've referred to rural communities already, and you've referred to the 3 mile radius, of course, for certain rural communities, despite being fairly close in proximity to their nearest town, there isn't, in fact, public transport available between that community and the town, meaning that they might not be very far on a map, but it's very difficult for people to get between them, particularly people who are elderly and disabled. So what will the Post Office do to provide these communities with access to postal services?
It's a very reasonable question, and I'll pick it up in two parts. We have a banking framework with the 30 largest banks in the country, where we provide withdrawal facilities, deposit facilities, obviously the ability to cash checks and also do bank balances. And that's something that we feel is extremely important. Access to cash in this country is extremely important. 8 million people use it every single day. And we know that there are 2 million who are unbanked who do use and need cash and access to cash. We know that a third of bank branches have closed since 2015, and we've made a very strong play to the government and indeed to the banks themselves, and the FCA particularly, that there should be legislation to ensure that when a bank branch closes, there is suitable and appropriate opportunities for customers, particularly vulnerable customers, to have access to cash. And that's something that we want to play, and that's a role we want to play. You'll be familiar with banking hubs that we're starting to open. We've got some 25 in the pipeline. Now, clearly that doesn't reflect the number of bank branches that are closing, and we've got to close that gap, because otherwise, as you say, there will be cash deserts, and that's something that we're desperately keen to avoid. I mentioned that we obviously have the mobile outreaches. That's what we use particularly in our rural locations to get out to vulnerable customers. As I mentioned before, we are meeting those access criteria, but you're quite right to be concerned. Bank branches are closing more quickly than banking hubs or access to cash is opening.
And how are you determining where these banking hubs are being opened? As I said, in my constituency, we do not have a single bank branch, but we are also seeing closures of post office facilities, which is creating exactly the kind of cash deserts that you've referred to. But I'm not aware of any plans by the post office to be opening up banking hub facilities or indeed more post office facilities within the constituency. So how are you determining which communities are getting these banking hubs?
The banking hubs are run by UK Finance, and they have their own operating company. So we provide the operational service for them. So it isn't our decision. I know that UK Finance and Link can determine from their sort of geospatial measurement where it is appropriate to put a banking hub, where a banking hub is needed. But we don't have influence over that. What we have is a contract to run and operate banking hubs as they're established. So we don't have an enormous amount of influence over where they go. We've just said that we are keen to run them on behalf of UK Finance. So that's absolutely the case. And going back to your question about post offices, we have a very, very clear set of criteria. The access criteria is extremely clear. We know where we have to provide postal services, and we know where we have to provide access to cash. And we, as I say, are fulfilling the 6 core access criteria that the government has set out for us, as well as the 11,500, which sits over and on top and above of that metric.
Surely you've referred to viability of branches. When you're making decisions about branch closures, do you not take into account what bank branch facilities are available in the local area and prioritise those branches for being kept open?
Well, clearly, as I say, we have a number of criteria that we use to ensure that we're delivering our access criteria, and to ensure that we're supporting customers and communities. It's imperative. We have a unique role to play because we are a commercial organisation as well as a social organisation, and we take that extremely seriously, our public service ethos. But we also have to be realistic about what it is that is viable and whether or not customer demand is there. Where customer demand is high and strong, of course we will be opening post offices and trying to ensure that we can find a franchisee to do so. But to your point, we don't own the post offices. We franchise the post offices, and we need to encourage and motivate different people to come forward to run them. As I mentioned before, we are in the middle of a very difficult cost of living crisis, but we're finding that the churn and the turnover for postmasters is surprisingly low, which is a good thing. And we think that that will become more difficult as the year progresses, but at the moment it is something that is in control.
Thank you. And my final question before I go back to the chair In terms of post office plans to overcome the increasing number of part-time outreaches and decline in full-time permanent post offices, does the slimmed-down drop-and-collect model form part of your plans to fill these gaps?
The drop and collect model, for those who aren't familiar, is the sort of first new format that the Post Office has introduced in about 10 years. And in essence, what it does is it provides a service for prepaid parcels and prepaid postal services. So that would include Royal Mail drop and click, that would include labels to go, that would include Parcel Force Worldwide. It's a collection service that we have identified for our inner urban areas where we are underrepresented and where we want to make sure that we capture the parcel market. So absolutely not a substitute for rural services. It, as I say, it only provides postal services. So it's part of our strategy to make sure that where we are underrepresented in large and inner urban areas, we have the opportunity to capture some of that market. And it's I suppose it's important to put it into context. It's probably a tenth of the cost of establishing a local post office. It's easy to train, it's easy to use, it's low cost and it's efficient. And our postmasters, those who are operating them, we have some 140 of them now, really like what it does because it provides the opportunity to capture some of that prepaid parcel market that's out there. So it isn't a replacement for outreaches or a replacement for any of our sort of flexible models that we use in rural areas.
Thank you. Can I just check about the temporary closures issue to understand if there's something that we might be able to help with? I'm grateful to the member for Merthyr Tydfil, who's in the public gallery today, who wrote to us about the Treharris post office in his constituency as an example, where it seems to have been temporarily closed now for more than 2 years. Yep. There are local people that would like to become the postmasters of that office, to have it reopened for their local community, but there's no way for them to be able to engage with you to do that. Apparently there's been no advertising around it, there's not been a consultation on its permanent closure. How can post offices be closed temporarily for more than 2 years? It's not temporary, is it?
No, I agree, and I'm surprised to hear the detail that there hasn't been any consultation. We are obliged in the first 3 months, if we decide that a particular post office is to reopen, to have a consultation. From 3 months onward, it's an engagement with the community, as it's called. But as I say at the very start, I think this notion of temporary is confusing, and I don't think it's particularly helpful for everybody. We obviously want to, and we have a team of some 50 colleagues who are out there provisioning, looking for franchisees to take on and run post offices in those areas where we may have been literally given 6 weeks' notice that a particular site might be about to close. So it's not always possible, of course, to open in these particular areas, but we do advertise, and we have a team that supports the advertising of where we want to open a post office. So I'm surprised, and I'll look into the Merthyr Tydfil and obviously get back to you on why that is the case.
That'd be great. If you could dispatch someone to have a look, that would be much appreciated. Jane Hunt, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Reid, for coming along today. I want to talk about the vision and for the network short and long term, but also about markets. So a couple of questions, first of all. I have an example in my constituency in Barrow-upon-Soar, where unfortunately the post office closed down, again, perhaps about a year or so ago. I have had significant help from the post office in trying to reopen it, and indeed I've written to every shop in the village asking if they would take on a post office. But still, we haven't been able to find anywhere. Yet you have a market there. What else could we do to help get you a market in places like Barrow-upon-Soar, where you do have the ability to take on more, if only somebody would take on the business?
It's a good question. I think, are we doing a good enough job advertising what it is that the post office does? I suspect we could do a better job. I'm very, very clear from a sort of long-term vision perspective that the mails and parcels market has huge opportunity for us as an organisation, that the banking and cash and banking market does too. We have an amazing travel business. We obviously provide great bill payment services. So we think we've got 4 very, very core parts of this commercial organisation that is going to develop and to grow. So if I think particularly about the parcels business, you've obviously heard from Mr. Thompson today and from others, we are looking to expand and become the first mile and the last mile for parcels in particular. We want to be an aggregator where we go out and use Amazon, Every, DHL, DPD, as well as Royal Mail Group, and make sure that we maintain that role as a community hub. And we think that's very viable, and we think that's a very, very realistic proposal and proposition for us. And with cash and banking, it's exactly the same. We see ourselves as providing the cash infrastructure for the country, and we want to play that role as we will see an acceleration in bank branches are going to close, and we want to make sure that we're there for the vulnerable, for the isolated, and for those in the cash-only society who still are very, very important, particularly in more rural communities, which is something that we have observed. So we think from a proposition perspective, we've got a great proposition. Now, I'm not familiar, obviously, with your particular site, and obviously we will look at that and try and understand how we can better sell what the post office does and the role it plays. And I think this is the interesting part. Yes, we are a commercial network. Yes, we are a commercial business. But I think certainly from a governmental perspective, it's recognising the social role that we play, particularly the role that we played during the pandemic, and at the role we're playing at the moment, whether that's with energy relief schemes, whether that's with council tax rebates, whether that's what we're doing in Northern Ireland that started yesterday in terms of making sure we get to the 75% of the nation in Northern Ireland who actually prepay their energy bills, getting cash to them. That's not something any other infrastructure could possibly provide. And I think it's really incumbent upon this committee and upon the government itself to recognise that we have a really, really crucial social role to play, as well as making it commercially viable. And I think that's something that we will be striving to do.
Indeed, I couldn't agree with you more about the social aspect of it. And indeed, the tricky bit is, if you don't have an outlet there, there is a market there, but you can't get to it. So it's an interesting thing. Whilst I was the Minister for Small Business, I visited Belper and saw your co-op site. Yes. So you had a post office within a co-op that then became a banking hub. And I think that could be a good way forward. You've referred to some other services there. What else is the post office looking to do to create itself into a universal hub, if you like, for all sorts of services that could then create a vision and a more developed network, perhaps even more than 11,671 outlets across the country in the short and the long term?
Yeah, I think the short term we are focused very, very extensively on our mails and parcels business. That is just under 50% of our total revenue and turnover, some 330 million, somewhere in that sort of range. And so it's so important that we have a very, very robust relationship with the Royal Mail Group, but more importantly, that we explore opportunities to do more. We have a non-exclusive relationship with Royal Mail now, and as I say, we've brokered deals with Amazon, with Every, DPD, DHL. We are selling in 50 post offices every product for the first time, so we've actually selling for the first time in our history non-Royal Mail mail and parcels products. I think that getting that piece right, the first mile and the last mile for customers in the parcels market is hugely important. But let's be very clear, the industrial action that is going on at the moment is threatening that business. And we had a very difficult Christmas, and postmasters had a very difficult Christmas as a consequence of the strike action. It reduced our trade by 26%, and that is something that postmasters will be deeply concerned about. So we have a vested interest in making sure that the Royal Mail and the CWU settle their dispute, and that we can get on and build our business both with the Royal Mail and with the other carriers as we see our role. So I think from a vision point of view, that's where we're spending our time. From a cash and banking point of view, as I say, we want to offer those banking services. It's really important that we do that. We think it's a huge role to play. But we are also what we call a platform market. The postmasters themselves have done an enormously good job, particularly through the pandemic and beyond, of building a great brand. And that brand we can use online, and we are using it online. So our financial services business online has been hugely successful this year, and we see that as the ability to sort of trade off a diversified business. So you have a diversified business that is generating profitability online, and we have a postmaster population that is struggling as a consequence of the strike and the strike action. And we're obviously looking for ways to make sure that we can use the brand that we built physically with what we're gaining online to make sure that we can measure and balance for our postmasters, and that's something we're trying to do at the moment so that profitability is more broadly shared.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Pawsey, please.
Mr. Reid, you just said that you're a commercial business but with a social role, and you've spent a working career in the commercial sector and now find yourself running an organisation that's accountable to the government. And
yes.
How does that differ?
It differs massively. We have a public sector ethos, and we've talked a little bit about what the infrastructure of this country is about, and we see the Post Office as a hugely important brand, and I think we are underplaying our potential role. Everybody's seeing what's going on in the high street. You're seeing shops and retailers closing, and we see ourselves as being a core part of communities up and down the country, and that's something that we know that we want to reinforce. And so we do need to look at what is the new model for the high street. We do need to look at what role can the Post Office play as part of a community hub, whether that's part of a cafe or a food store, or a convenience store, or a retail store. How do we make the Post Office more flexible to do that? And that's something that I'm finding.
Okay. And in terms of accountability, you're not accountable to shareholders, for example. You're accountable to BAYs.
I'm accountable to I have a single shareholder, which is the government, yes.
Okay. Do they interfere? Do they let you get on with doing whatever you want to do? How does that relationship work?
How does that relationship? It works very well. We have a collaborative relationship. I've had a number of postal ministers this year, as you'll probably be aware, and it is collegiate and it's collaborative. But like any shareholder, obviously they place their demands on us as well.
What would happen if there was a difference of view? If you wanted to take the organisation in one direction and the government perhaps got a slightly different priority? How would that work?
Well, clearly, I would obviously be speaking with the Postal Minister and indeed with the Secretary of State, which I do on quite regularly about the direction of travel and where we want to go.
And are there any disputes about the direction of travel?
No disputes about the direction of travel. There are obviously...
Any disputes at all?
Are there any disputes at all? Obviously, there are funding issues that we have with in any business, and it's important to recognise those funding issues. There are a lot of pressures on the Post Office at the moment. As you're fully aware, we're in the middle of a public inquiry. We're obviously trying to fix and right the wrongs of the past. We're trying to address compensation. And clearly we're battling, like all other retail businesses, in a very difficult market. So, of course there are, and I recognise within government that there are funding pressures, right the way across government.
And are there features of your business that you want government to support you financially on? Or are you able to do what you want to do largely through your own resources?
I think one of the challenges that any government-owned organisation has, it has a single source of funding, and that single source of funding is the Treasury. And clearly, from my perspective, I'm looking to identify different sources of funding so that we can borrow to do different things. And that's a conversation I am having as we speak with BAYs and with my colleagues in the department to see if there are ways that we can diversify our funding so that we can capture markets.
Is that
in the
with
right
a view
way.
to making yourselves more self-sufficient?
Yes.
And that's working? You're heading in the right direction?
We're having those conversations. It's fairly early doors at the moment in terms of what we're doing, but clearly those conversations are wrapped up in some of the more challenging conversations that we have around making sure that we run a very, very efficient network, and also at the same time capturing those commercial opportunities so that we can continue to play a social role.
And does the social obligation prevent you from being as commercial as you might like to be?
No, I don't think it does. I think it's very difficult to separate the commercial and the social. I think it is part and parcel with a public sector ethos of what the Post Office stands for and what the Post Office is. And I think that's the strength of the brand. I think that's why we have such great trust. And I think it's why, for instance, that we can be as successful online as we are at the moment. So in terms of the Post Office insurance, in terms of our foreign exchange business, and in terms of how we do business online, that is built on the fact that people know that we are government-owned, that we have a clear mandate, and that we have a very trusting network that helps build that brand. I think that's a very, very important characteristic that we lose at our peril.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick question on financial performance at the Post Office. I can see that you've had trading profits now for a couple of years, which is a positive turn of events compared to previous trading years. But still you have overall statutory losses of 597 million in 2021, 300 million in 2020. A huge percentage of that is obviously compensation for the Horizon scandal. But if you take out the Horizon scandal costs, I think the Post Office overall is still loss-making. Is that right?
It is, but we are... It's important, I think, to separate out where is the subsidy that the government gives us, which is to run, obviously, the uncommercial elements of the network. And again, clearly that is part of it. But at a trading level, yes, you're right. We made 86 million, I think it is, in 2018-19. Then clearly, when in the years of the pandemic, we dropped down to 35 and 35. We will perform better this year as we emerge from the pandemic. And as I mentioned before, it's the ability to different parts of the business can respond to the market in different ways. It will be less successful, unquestionably, in terms of the physical infrastructure of Post Office, as in our bricks and mortar business will be less successful than our online business. But to my point before, we will make a trading profit bigger than we made in the previous 2 years. And obviously we're looking at ways to make sure that we can use that profit efficiently and effectively to support our postmasters out on the physical high street.
We heard earlier today, I think it was suggested that your salary has doubled recently. Is that true?
My salary hasn't doubled, no. Yes, I got a bonus this year, but my salary itself, I haven't actually had a pay increase for 3.5 years, so that's not strictly true.
And your bonus, I mean, it's just a bit of a theme of questions for me. I'm interested to hear how executives get bonuses when companies are loss-making. How is your bonus performance assessed?
My bonus performance is assessed on sort of 3 core criteria. On first and foremost, fixing the past and making sure that actually we make the necessary changes to the organisation such that nothing like this can possibly happen again in terms of the inquiry. Clearly, there's an element of making sure that we fulfil our social obligations in terms of delivering the access criteria, making sure 11,500 branches are on the high street. Certainly, amount is due to profitability. But I've made it very clear that putting Postmaster Trust at the heart of my business, and that's something, again, that I am measured on as well in terms of how postmasters feel the organisation is being run. And that's the basis of the remuneration. On top of that, this year, clearly, we are trying to migrate off the Horizon system. As you'll be fully aware, it's a 20-plus-year-old system, and I think it's very important on a number of levels. One, so that we can be commercially more efficient, and two, I think it's appropriate, given the nature of what has happened in the past, that we make a clean break from that system, and clearly making sure we execute against that is part of it as well.
We also heard earlier that there are sub-postmasters that are paying themselves below the equivalent of the national minimum wage and struggling to make ends meet. Do you recognise that? And if so, what can you do about it?
We're very concerned, and as I mentioned before, we're very concerned as when I look at the state of the estate, when I look at potentially 50% of the post office estate is earning and generating less than £5,000 of profit. Energy alone, we know that from speaking to our postmasters, they are likely to see an increase of between £6,000 and £8,000 this year, which is why we lobbied very, very hard for the government that they should, if they believe they are key workers, then they should be ring-fenced accordingly. And I would emphasise again, I think that's extremely important. So we were disappointed when we weren't given that key worker status last week when the energy bills support scheme was reduced to £400. That is a challenge for us, and that is something that obviously I will be taking up with government, because clearly that's something that we need to ensure that postmasters are acknowledged.
Yes, and we just also heard, just to finish off my questions here, that it was suggested that you have refused to enter into direct negotiations with the trade union. Is that?
I find that a bit curious. Mr. Furey wrote to me on Friday inviting me to attend. I've never refused to meet the CWU, and of course we have been in negotiation with the CWU fairly regularly. It was unfortunate that the meeting at ACAS was postponed last Wednesday, but we are open to talk. Of course we are.
Okay, so you will talk with him. Thank you. Okay. Ian Lavery, please.
Thanks. Mr. Reid, what you said you hadn't had a pay increase for 3 years. What's your salary?
My salary is $415,000 a year.
And what was the bonuses you've had in the last 3 years?
I had a £400,000 bonus last year. I didn't take a bonus the year before, and I took a 50% voluntary reduction in my bonus the year before that.
Did you say £400,000?
Correct.
Is that what you said?
That's correct.
Bonus?
That's correct.
Right, okay. In 2021, the post office made a profit, I think, of £35 million. 2021, 22, £39 million, and there was bonuses to management totaling somewhere in the region of £2 million. You've offered a fantastic workforce who provide a fantastic service. 2%, then 3%, then 5%, and it still hasn't been concluded. Will there be an improvement in that offer to this fantastic workforce?
As I said before, we're very keen to talk to the CWU. We want to make sure that we get ourselves in a position where we can obviously settle. That would be imperative. I've made a very clear offer that we will pay or backdate the pay to the 1st of April, at 5% plus a £500 sort of supplement for energy. We want to make those payments. I'm happy to make those payments now and not jeopardise in any way people's ability to strike if that's what they want to do. And I'm keen to make sure we bring a resolution to this issue.
Thank you. Andy MacDonald, please.
Thanks, Chair. Reference the Horizon scandal, Mr. Reid. 95% of applicants to the historical shortfall scheme have now received compensation. Can you tell us what the status is of the remaining and new claims and how the Post Office is ensuring that offers are made as quickly as possible?
I can, yes. You'll be aware that 2,374 people came forward to within the HSS scheme, as you identified. This time last year, when I was here, I said that we would endeavour to get to a situation where 95% had had offers made to them by the end of the calendar year, which we managed to fulfil. And I think there was to the tune of £74 million offers were made. 88% of those individuals have accepted their offers, and we've paid out to the tune of £47.5 million so far, and obviously will make up the difference. So there are some, well, as I say, the last 5% will be more complicated. There's no doubt about that. Some of those are late applicants, some of those are insolvencies, some of those are bankruptcies, and they will take a little bit more time. But I'm very hopeful, and we have set ourselves a target to try and complete these by the end of March, and we are on with doing just that. So my hope is that we will have completed the entire historic shortfall scheme by the end of March.
Just on that, just stepping back and looking at compensation more broadly.
Yeah.
Some of these postmasters have lost everything. Some have gone to jail, have lost their liberty. Their lives have been completely ruined. When somebody sustains such a trauma, they usually recover their losses, both past and future, their pension losses, and they are compensated for that grave insult to them in terms of their loss of liberty and the psychological damage. Whatever schemes are produced here, it's going to be a massive shortfall opposite the true extent of the losses that these individuals have sustained. And if you or I were in that position, I think we would want full compensation. We talk about full and fair. It should be for everything that they've lost. Don't you think that's where we should be in properly compensating these postmasters who suffered the gravest of insults and their lives totally ruined?
I couldn't agree with you more, and I have been consistent in the 3 years since I joined the Post Office to address these issues. I mean, the first task I had was to settle the GLO. It was the first thing that I did when I joined 3 years ago. I'm absolutely clear that we want to make sure that it's fast and speedy justice that is delivered for our postmasters. No question about that at all. You'll be very familiar. There are 3 schemes. There's the historic shortfall scheme, which we've just talked about, and we are on with delivering literally 100% of that by the end of March. The overturned convictions are a different scheme, obviously, by definition. People will be familiar that the Post Office between 1999 and 2014 prosecuted 706 individuals, and clearly it is our job to make sure we get out to those individuals and encourage them to come forward to have their cases and their convictions overturned if they are and have been horizon-based. And what we've done to date is that we have disclosed information to 153, only 153, and I recognise that that is something that is of frustration to the committee as it is to ourselves. We want people to come forward. We believe now that we have contacted all but 20 of those 706 individuals, and we've used the CCRC to help us, from an independent perspective, encourage people to come forward and have their cases reviewed by the CCRC or indeed their appeals overturned. And clearly that is something that is of great concern to me, that only 153 have to date done so. And we need support and we need help to do that. I can completely understand that will be many postmasters out there who simply want to put this to the back of their mind. It's the last thing they want to do is to come forward and revisit what clearly was an appalling time for them. And yet at the same time, to your point, we want to make sure that we deliver justice and we deliver it fairly, and that's absolutely my objective, to make sure we do that. So we're working hard to think through with the CCRC, how do we continue to trace, how we continue to encourage, how we provide the environment where people don't feel threatened, but that they can come forward. And as I say, to date, 83 have had their convictions overturned, and we've paid some £15 million out so far to individuals, both pecuniary and non-pecuniary in terms of the claims. Much more to do. It is hard work. Everybody is individual. Every case is individual. But we think we are making good progress, and it's very difficult to assess, how good is good progress. We all want it to be quicker. Be assured, I absolutely want it to be quicker. And it's very difficult to get a benchmark on how quickly you can deliver justice of this sort of nature. Clearly, I spend my time looking at what other inquiries have done and how other inquiries have gone about it, whether it's Grenfell or Infected Blood or others. But, we want to make sure that we can deliver it as quickly as possible. And we have, as I say, a large team disclosing information, making things available so that this horrible and sorry state can be brought to a conclusion.
Thank you. Speed's good, but full is also important.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Just for anybody watching proceedings today, just to reassure them, the committee continues to engage with ministers as well as the Post Office and the CCRC to make sure that everything is being done for victims so that they can come forward and be compensated. And I would echo the comments of Andy MacDonald about that being full as well as fair compensation paid by the Treasury. Okay, Mark Pawsey, please.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I was on the committee that looked into this issue, and we heard some absolutely harrowing accounts of people running small businesses who were accused of stealing from the organisation, and it was horrible to hear their accounts. And I welcome what you've said and the work you've done to compensate people and to try and set the record straight. I just want to ask you specifically about the suspension pay compensation scheme, which relates to people who weren't remunerated before the contracts were suspended in March 2019.
Correct.
The Minister wrote to us in November saying that the Post Office will write to all of those people involved, providing compensation on the remuneration that they were not paid, and also in respect of consequential losses. Has that been fulfilled?
The process has started. We have the first letters have gone out. We've had the first responses back. So we think there are some 3,000 individuals who 3,000 who have had who received no pay during a suspension period. And clearly we're contacting all of them, and we're going to write to all of them. And as I say, that process has begun, and we've already started receiving responses to it. And we have, as I say, secured the funding to make sure that we can make the appropriate
Have
changes.
you got an estimate? The budget that will be required for this compensation package?
We don't know yet what that's going to look like. As I say, we're still working
in the region of?
Many millions, yes.
All right. Okay, thank you, Chair.
And the Treasury is presumably committed to giving you the money. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. That brings the session to an end. So, Nick Reed, thank you for your contributions today. I'll bring the session formally to an end. Order.